Well, good afternoon, members. It's 2 o'clock. Ask you all to stand for prayers, please. Creator and sustainer of all things and all people, you are the source of all wisdom and light. Enlighten our minds to receive your guidance so that you may lead us into true wisdom. May all that we say and do in the service of this county, whether as an elected member or as an officer, be in accordance with your will and the good of your people. Amen. Housekeeping rules, evacuation procedure. In the event of having to evacuate the council chamber, would everyone leave by one of the two exits at the rear of the chamber? Officers will be on hand to assist any disabled persons. Mobile phones. May I ask all members who have mobile phones with them to ensure that they are switched off so they will not disturb this meeting. Agenda item number 1, Chairman's announcements. Armistice Day. The County Council marked Armistice Day with a service and 2-minute silence on Monday the 11th of November. The short and dignified service was very moving, and I would particularly like to thank Leanne Plummer for playing the last post in Rivale so competently. I was also pleased to see that County Hall was illuminated in red for the duration of the Royal British Legion's Poppy Appeal. Finally, I would like to thank those members who were able to attend local services on Remembrance Sunday and lay a County Council wreath. The Green Apple Award. I had the great honour and privilege, I have to say, of going to Kensington Palace on Monday the 18th of November to represent the council when King Industry, quite appropriately named, were awarded a Green Apple Environment Award for their work to restore a reed bed at Donisthorpe Woodland Park. King Industries was appointed to carry out this work by the County Council as part of our commitment to improve the natural environment throughout Leicestershire. For those who may be wondering what a Green Apple Award is, that is physically what a Green Apple Award is. I was hoping it might be bigger actually, but that's what we got. It is an award presented by the Green Organisation, who have been in existence for over 30 years with the aim of recognising and promoting environmental best practice around the world. The award is therefore testament to the work of King Industries on our behalf and to the innovative partnership working which made the scheme a reality. When I was there, by the way, I was just telling the Chief Executive, there were some real massive players there, multi-million-pound firms all vying for this award. The Donisthorpe scheme was projected to cost 600,000, delivered at 450,000, going from memory. So I can't genuinely tell you how well the County Council have done on that one. It really was. And it was a good day, although it did snow on the way back. The King's Award for Voluntary Service. I am pleased to inform members, if they are not already aware, that 6 local voluntary organisations received the King's Award for Voluntary Service as part of the annual awards announced on the 14th of November to mark the King's birthday. 5 of the organisations are based in Leicestershire. The King's Award for Voluntary Service holds the same value as an MBE and acknowledges the remarkable efforts of volunteer groups in their communities. The winning organisations were Young Leicestershire, who transformed the lives of society's disadvantaged young people; Quorn Library Volunteers, who have created a community hub by resurrecting an old library, offering much more than just books; Greater Wigston Historical Society and Heritage Centre, who have established and run an outstanding research and advice centre which preserves Wigston's community heritage; Melton Community First Responders, who provide vital and life-saving emergency aid and support to the local community and EMAS; Sound Cafe Leicester, who support those who are homeless, isolated and vulnerably housed in Leicester City. Harborough Moors Bags, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who make and distribute to the public of fabric bags to reduce the use of different plastics. I'm sure members will wish to join me in congratulating all the organisations for their award, and they should be really proud of themselves. Market Harborough Football Club. I would love and congratulate Market Harborough Football Club on reaching the second round of the FA Cup, where the team put up a brave fight, losing in a narrow 5-3 defeat after extra time to Reading Football Club. This was a tremendous feat, particularly as it is the first time they have ever qualified for the FA Cup. The team is currently a member of the Southern League Premier Division Central, whereas Reading Football Club is currently in 6th position in League One. Moving on to agenda item number 2, minutes. I move that the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 25th September 2024, copies which have been circulated to members, be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Mr. Shepherd, will you sign? Second.
Seconded, Chairman.
Thank you very much, members. Agenda item number 3, declarations of interest. I invite members who wish to do so to make declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda for this meeting. I personally have a disclosable pecuniary interest in the notice of motion due to my agricultural land holdings. I will leave the room for this item and ask Mr. Shepherd to take the chair in my place. Are there any other declarations? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 4, questions asked under standing order. The questions and replies set out in standing order will be taken as read and entered into the minutes. I have received no notice of supplementary questions. Agenda item number 5. To receive position statements from members of the Cabinet. I now invite the acting leader to make a statement. When the acting leader has finished her statement, I will invite members to speak. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and I will then call you to speak. However, I will invite Mr. Hunt and Mr. Mullaney as leaders of the opposition to speak last before the leader's right of reply. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on the award. I hope you'll put that in pride of place somewhere. So I'll start with the MTFS position. So our position remains extremely challenging, although the strong grip that we've maintained over our finances has ensured that we aren't at crisis point. The Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October did little to improve the position, and we're still awaiting the actual details. It's likely that we'll still be facing a gap approaching 100 million by the final year of the MTFS. The policy statement from the local government minister gave little clarity, and we await the provisional statement which the minister said is due before Christmas. The Chancellor's budget and policy statement also failed to provide any certainty or solution for the high needs deficit. Innovation, efficiency and tough decisions mean that we've been able to avoid the crisis point many councils are now in. We're still working hard to provide vital support to vulnerable people and protect other services our residents value. But what we really need from government is a credible long-term plan. In the meantime, we are refreshing our MTFS based on the assumptions that we know about now, and the Cabinet will be receiving a report on the 17th of December. On to the Household Support Fund. So members will be aware that the Household Support Fund is funding from the government, which enable us to support our communities over the winter months with the cost of living. This is allowing us to support children in receipt of free school meals with food vouchers during the school holidays, support food banks and charities, and provide food and fuel vouchers to the most vulnerable in our area. As you can imagine, demand has been exceptionally high this round, which adds further to the frustration felt when external analysts of the budget indicated that the overall grant will be cut by 10% for the next financial year. The recent cold weather has reminded many of the financial impact of the loss of winter fuel payments for pensioners in Leicestershire. We know that there are many residents in the county who will lose out on this support, but who could be eligible for pension credit, unlocking winter fuel payments and other benefits. We have used a small amount of our funding from the Household Support Fund to support Age UK in Leicestershire and Rutland information and advice services, which can offer support to pensioners to help them to see if they are eligible for pension credit and to make an application, which we all know is extremely difficult to do. Talking about winter, we're getting ready for winter here, so our winter gritting teams have started work to ensure the heaviest used routes are safe and traffic can keep moving. We are also promoting preparedness for winter flooding and have recently held 2 very successful community drop-in sessions that I know have been extremely welcome by our local communities. On to our bus service improvement plan funding. On the 19th of November, the Department for Transport announced a further allocation of bus service improvement plan money funding for the 2025-26 financial years. Conditions and detail around the funding are expected very, very soon, and I'm sure Ozzy will say more about how the additional funding will be used, but I assure members that it will help us to move towards achieving some of the ambitions set out in our bus service improvement plan. And finally, I'd just like to mention the Leicestershire Business and Skills Partnership. So in the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October, the government announced that it was minded to see support funding for the BSP and similar post-LEP bodies across England. Funding was provided for the current financial year, but will now end on the 31st of March 2025. Funding for specific programmes is the subject of separate decisions by government. Officers from the City and County Councils are considering the implications of the funding ended and will present options to myself and the City Mayor in due course. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs Taylor. At this moment, I have 2 speakers, questions. Mr O'Shea.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, our winter gritting teams carried out their first precautionary treatment of the season on Sunday the 17th of November. On Monday the night, the 18th of November, our gritting teams worked throughout the night, carrying out 2 treatments to 48% of the council road network across the county, ensuring that the heaviest used routes were safe for traffic to keep moving. In relation to the flooding, the council is working with other risk management authorities, community groups and flood wardens to promote preparedness for winter flooding and to be flood ready. Messaging is being used across the county. 2 community drop-in sessions were recently held in Market Harborough and at County Hall with high levels of engagement, which I'm pleased to see. We will continue to issue communications prior to significant forecast of storms. This work helps us to achieve one of the 5 objectives in Leicestershire Flood Local Risk Management Strategy, to manage local flood risk through effective preparedness, response to and recovery and flood events. In relation to the bus money, I'm very pleased to say that we have received on the 19th of November, the Department of Transport announced further allocation to bus service improvement plan known as the BSIP funding for 25-26. That's 1 year. Conditions and details surrounding the funding are expected to arrive imminently. The additional funding will be used in addition to the previous BSIP grant allocations to review and redesign the county's supported bus network, to increase access to pump prime services, to increase patronage and secure more sustainable services for the future, trial new services to access demand, introduce more flexible demand responsive transport solutions, offer fixed term and targeted promotions such as free travel for all, free or reduced travel for young people and seasonal festive journeys. Members will know that during November on a Saturday that we gave free travel in the county to our residents. Work with operators to improve operational standards such as punctuality and passenger satisfaction. Investigate travel hubs and look to improve bus stop infrastructure where appropriate. Improve public transport information for all. The grant funding allocated will assist the authority further in moving forward, achieving some of the ambitions detailed within the recently updated Leicester BSIP 24. The grant funded is being awarded with an initial spend date of March 2026. and the amount of funding that we received was just over £7.5 million. And our teams are working very hard to make sure that we can improve the bus services across the county. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr O'Shea. Mr Brecken.
Thank you, Chairman. The acting leader has clearly set out the problem we face regarding the MTFS. A guaranteed increase in costs, but no certainty of the support being provided to us or to the organisations that support our residents. Members who have read the government's policy statement hoping to find some clarity following the budget will undoubtedly have been left very disappointed. The statement did little more than to confirm the desire of this government to increase the importance of deprivation while allocating funding. Whilst no one will disagree that the deprivation is an important consideration, it should not be forgotten that it is already a significant factor in existing formulas. You would expect some evidence from the government that this is the most urgent aspect of the broken funding system that needs fixing. Unfortunately, this is not something that they have troubled themselves with, and there is no evidence given or offered. Even the most cursory look at the data would have shown them that where there are far more fundamental problems, for example, both Leicestershire and our neighbours in the city receive 35 to 50% less funding than authorities with similar levels of deprivation. So it is not a political party issue or a colour of politics. So regardless of our political persuasion, we have been elected to representatives of Leicestershire residents, and I encourage you all to press your MPs to hold this government to account and commit to an evidence-based fair funding review that incorporates all drivers of funding need and is free from any political bias. I have been going through the budget workings with my finance team regarding the political impact of the various government announcements made. The decision to introduce several new formulas without any accompanying detail is unhelpful and will cause the draft budget later this month to contain a higher level of uncertainty than desirable. But I will make sure that all members in the chamber are kept updated when significant updates are available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Brecken. Mr Mear.
Cheers, thank you, Mr Chairman. I'll deal with the MTFS issue first. I, along with other local authority leaders, was invited to a webinar and a Q&A really with Jim McMahon last Friday regarding the MTFS and the settlement. I don't know if the acting leader was present on that call because there was over 500 local authority leaders and people on there. But what I got from there was more optimistic. You know, £4 billion extra into local government funding, real terms 3.2% increase for funding this year. Yes, they're going to look at fairer funding going forward, but that'll be from 26 years onwards, because you can't expect a government that's been in place 3 or 4 months or 5 months to reorganise local government funding overnight. So I'm a bit more optimistic that Leicestershire will get more than it thinks it will get based on this pessimistic statement. And I did email the director, Declan, regarding this, and he said they're still looking at it and to see what the outcome will be. So I am disappointed when Mr Brecken stands up and thinks there'll be a lot more uncertainty. But because what I got from that call and from the policy statement, was certainty actually of exactly what's coming down the road as well. Yes, future years there might be uncertain, but that's government to look at and for the ministry to say actually this is the way we're going to fund local government going forward. But £4 billion extra, I'm sure some of that will trickle down to Leicestershire, so let's not be pessimistic. The household support fund, well actually like a lot of things, the last Conservative government didn't leave any funding for the household support fund. So when the acting leader says she's disappointed that 10% will be cut potentially next year, well actually none of it was due this year. It's the Labour government that came in and carried it on an extra funding this year. They put £421 million into England for the household support fund, which was due to end in September. So the Conservative government left no money, the administration left no money for it to go forward. So yeah, that's £421 million, and Leicestershire's share of it that we can use this winter, and that's thanks to the Labour government. So, you know, let's not be pessimistic that we might get a 10% cut, because you know what? I'd rather have 90% of something than 0% of it. So that's, you know, that's there. And also, it's interesting, isn't it, that all this household support fund, it's all targeted. It's targeted to the people that need it the most. And that's why, you know, when you hear the statement about the winter fuel allowance, again, we had this debate at the last council, you know, it's about targeting resources. So the winter fuel allowance, the household support fund is targeted. We get the money from government, we target it to the people that really need it. We just don't give it to everybody and anybody that requests it. So, you know, it's you can't say one thing in one sentence and then something different in the other one. The business improvement plan funding, yes, that came as a bit of a shock, really. Leicestershire Business and Skills Partnership. I sit on it and I represent the district, but with my county hat on, it's concerning that funding has been withdrawn, but hopefully whatever will replace it in April next year going forward will be something that is inclusive of Leicestershire and improves it, because I was on a call with some of the businesses that are sit on the business board, and they're concerned. They don't mind what the structure is, they're just concerned that they need a voice in Leicestershire to be able to develop the skills and have the businesses come in and the investment come into Leicestershire. So that will be very important. The acting leader was very kindly wrote to me and said that this is something that they are looking into along with the city mayor. And you know, that partnership working is definitely needed. And I'll let my colleagues talk about the bus funding, because I think that's fantastic. £7.6 million. I advertised the free buses well on Saturday. I think it was a very massive uptake. So that's something, and hopefully the £7.6 million will help and improve bus travel throughout the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I'll just have to respond to Mr. Mayor. I too was on the webinar last Friday with the Minister, and there must have been two webinars, because the one I was on was completely different. So when the Minister talked about extra money going to councils, it was only on the basis that they put their council tax up by the maximum. So half the increase is going to be self-generated in-house. The Rurality Fund is being withdrawn, so it's going to hit several of our districts exceptionally hard. I mean, it is a nonsense to say there was anything in there for local government unless you're an inner city Labour authority. This is actually a ploy to actually destroy the Shire counties, and that's what it boils down to. So I'm sorry Mr. Mayor was on a different webinar to me, but I'd just like you to know the facts, that most of this money isn't coming from central government. They're not intending to give us any money. They're not funding half the increases in national insurance that we've seen, particularly where we outsource services. It is a complete and utter fabrication that Mr. Mayor can stand up and say a Labour government is giving us money.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Mr. Galton.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, the first thing I'd say to Terry is, how is that any different from the previous arrangement? There's always been an assumption that we would maximise council tax. Previous government said that that's what we had to do, and it was counted in the formula and assumed that you had done it, whether you did it or not. So I'm not sure that argument really holds any water. I think the money that's been referred to for buses, my own area is under review at the moment, I'm hoping it's going to change the outcome. It is extremely welcome, as the lead member said. That investment, I think, could make an incredible difference to the provision of bus services in Leicestershire. And I'm hoping, I have written to the director, I've not had a reply yet, I'm hoping it will actually allow parts of the policy to be relaxed a bit in the review process, because we can now be, as you've indicated today, a bit more generous, and the briefing actually refers to the ability possibly to look at reinstating some services or even some new services that we could support. So that all sounds quite hopeful. I appreciate we've got to have the detail come through. But I'm particularly keen, and this is why I've written to the director, to understand whether we can change the policy, relax the policy that officers are currently having to follow in the review. But I just wanted to come back to some of the tone of the acting leader's statement, and we're going to see it later, aren't we, in the notice of motion. And you know, a lot of the points I agree. It's for the Labour members to defend what the government's doing. But what I'm noticing is, and I say it'll come out in the motion, is the vigour and determination now to criticise the government that wasn't there prior to May. From 2010 through to last July, you know, we had endless trips, Mr Rushton and before him, Mr Rhodes going down on the train, we're going to meet the minister for this and the minister for that, and they lasted 5 minutes. And what did we get? Absolutely nothing. Nothing whatsoever. And part of the problem was there was no real vigour or determination to take that issue on and to criticise what was then obviously a Conservative government. Yes, there was lots of work done behind the scenes on how the formula could be made better, but it was never really pushed. It only got, there was some money put in, wasn't there, between the initial settlement and the final settlement this year, because for the first time some MPs actually said they would threaten to rebel against the laying of the final settlement. And I can remember, being here long enough to remember, in the 80s and 90s, when the former member for Harborough, Sir John Farr, actually did vote against the local government settlement because it was so appalling for Leicester, for Leicestershire and some of the districts. So it can be done. Pressure can be brought to do it. But as I say, what I'm noting now is a willing to criticise and to highlight the shortcomings of the system. Don't argue about that at all. But had you done it a bit more, with a bit more passion and a bit more criticism and fierceness for 15 years, we might not be in the position we're in now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Golden. Mr King.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Wow. So first of all, what I wanted to say, I wanted to join in your note about the fantastic performance of Harborough Town Football Club, which is actually situated the ground in Market Harborough West and Foxton, and obviously delighted they got as far as they did, but obviously got pipped in extra time. And also the award to the More Bags organisation. I actually have one of those. They're really good. But the couple of things I wanted to just raise. So first of all, I'm really grateful for the response from the County Council and others, the emergency response where the River Jordan and also broke its banks, and also for the flooding in Market Harborough Town Centre in September. But having attended a public meeting on Friday last week, residents are very concerned about the potentiality for repeat incidents of these things. And one of the concerns I have is that community activists and residents in these meetings are pointing the finger at the County Council, saying it's because the County Council isn't performing its function properly. And I'm just seeking reassurance that we are indeed performing our function properly as the lead local flood authority, but also in terms of things like cleaning gullies and things like that, because they are the things that have been said to me as a county councillor in Market Harborough by local residents, and so they're very concerned about these things. Just to touch on the bus grant money, that's really great news, but residents in my locality would like to see improvements in nighttime and Sunday services, because there are huge problems. If you want to go out in the evening into Leicester or anywhere else, you cannot get, well, you might get there, but you might not get back unless you pay for a very expensive taxi. So we would like to see some improvements to that. And I'm glad Mr Mia is reading off the Labour Party crib sheet, but the reality is councils have already been notified that they're losing funding from government, and the government's assuming that all councils are going to increase council tax by the maximum. And what's deeply concerning is that the new government is finding more ways to waste money than ever before. So I read the other day that £1 billion has been spent on stopping wind turbines turning when it's too windy. I mean, you couldn't make these things up. And that's where our money, that's where our taxpayers' money, all of us, is being wasted on silly things like that, instead of being put into services that matter for local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr King. I don't believe there are... Mr Ash.
So I just wanted to just reiterate the comments about the Green Apple Award. I'm delighted that it was such a prestigious award was given for the Woodland Park in Donisthorpe, which is a real success story. Started when John Major opened brought in the National Forest, continued under the Blair government. It's actually a good cross-party and example of what government can do to regenerate an area. And certainly as I use it myself, and it's getting more and more used more, excuse me, it's getting used more and more. I think it's a real success story, so I'm pleased that you're able to go down and accept the award on behalf of the Woodland Park and the company that undertook the work, but most importantly Leicestershire County Council, and also just to thank Aussie for the free buses that they're being run to Conkers for the Winter Festival. over each weekend running up to Christmas, which is very welcomed by local residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ashman. I think that's it for the time being. Mr Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. A miserable lot across the chamber because, you know, we haven't even heard the settlement yet, and we'll get a full report on the 17th. But the report that we've got in front of us on the MTFS, Chair, as I think my colleagues, Mr Gorton said, it's got a different tone from before. It's all this sort of, you know, this is terrible, this is even worse, and they've only given us £1 billion, and so on. Now, that's really important because when the leader and the acting leader gives us a statement, traditionally, it's always been a statement of fact. It's been a statement of what's going on, and we've depended on that. If reports come through in this sort of tone, we're not going to believe them. So I'd appeal to Deborah in the future, just sort of to tone the politics down. We can have a motion later on in the afternoon if you want. But from a point of view of the opposition parties, we want to know what's going on, and this is a little bit too slanted to give us a full view, but we'll get the full view later on in the month. And thanks to the chief officers for bringing it to us fairly promptly. The Household Support Fund is important, and I'm pleased to see that we're onto that already. It's a shame we didn't hear about Harborough Football Club because, you know, there's always some good news there, even though they lost. But, you know, sometimes losing's not so bad. The most interesting thing, I think, for all of us is the extra 17+ million that we've got for buses. But even Ozzy looked a bit glum when he announced that. I'd just like to say one thing on that because I'm very interested in this area of our work. And that's, we've got a lot of money, don't waste it. Make sure that it's spent on sustainable services. There's some comments in here about looking at experiments. And I'd plead with you, you've got some capital, spend that capital on services which are going to last and be there for everybody and not just experimental. Because experiments have to be withdrawn if they don't work, and that's worse than introducing them again. And the other point is that we have to work closely with City on this because City is a destination for most of us at some time or other, and it serves those services coming into the county. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. I invite Mr Mullaney.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. In terms of the MTFS, it's a worry that Leicestershire County Council is facing a funding gap of almost £100 million by the end of the current medium-term financial strategy. We've a legacy of years of underfunding, with Leicestershire being put to the back of the queue for funding by the last Conservative government that has put us in that position. We hope that, although we don't have much expectation that that will change under the current government, we hope they will look sympathetically at our situation because Leicestershire deserves better funding than it has had for many years. In terms of the Household Support Fund, we're obviously glad that that is carrying on. Many people are still struggling through this cost of living crisis, so I'm glad that some support will carry on through the County Council, and I know at the borough and district level, in my own district in Hinckley and Bosworth, we support people through cost of living support, and such things are helping people when they are struggling. And I'd also add that obviously on the winter fuel payment issue, under the current plans, more than 90% of pensioners in Leicestershire face losing that support, including many who are struggling and finding it difficult to make ends meet. So I hope the government change their minds on that issue even at this late point. In terms of the buses funding, I welcome the extra money. I hope the County Council will look sympathetically at restoring some of those popular, some of those routes that were lost that people want to see back. Certainly the 159 that supported many villages and towns in the county, including Hinckley, is a service that a number of people still ask me in the towns and villages to be brought back, and also the number 1 and 2 service that served Hinckley but also Barwell and Earl Shilton. Those 2 services are also services that many people ask about bringing back. So I hope when we have this extra funding, we will look sympathetically about trying to restore these services or some similar services in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mullaney. I now invite the Acting Leader, Mrs Taylor, to respond to the comments that have been made.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I just want to thank Ozzy for all his work in the gritting and flooding department. I know it's a very important subject to our residents, and we need to ensure that the BSIP money that we have is sensibly spent and we're put on a sustainable for the future, and we don't fall off a cliff edge, which is likely to happen. Again, Lee has highlighted how we are very concerned. We have no guidance from the government at the moment, and like Julia said, we've got to wait, like everyone else, until just before Christmas, when we're all about to break up for well-earned Christmas break, to then digest what funding we haven't been allocated within the budget. To Jill, yes, we were represented on the webinar, and I'm with Terry. I think the webinar that we attended was totally different to the one you did. It's great headlines, wonderful headlines, but when you actually dig down into the detail there, and it's just a drop in the ocean, especially for unitary authorities and counties authorities. And the Household Support Fund, I'd rather have 100% of our current funding than drop to 90%, because we're running out of money fast for our residents, helping them with the Household Support Fund. And just to be clear, the Business and Skills Partnership is the replacement for the LEPs, so there won't be another replacement in the new year. All the funding's been cut. So we're now working with City about how we're going to move forward with the Business and Skills Partnership with no funding from government. So there is not another replacement coming next year. And Terry's right, you know, it's good to try and put a good spin on a bad story that we get nothing out of. And once we get our financial settlement, I'm sure the truth will come out there, that we will be very poorly funded, and the rurality aspect that we get at the moment is totally going to be wiped out from under our feet. So, Simon, good news about the money, and the timescales of funding is very, very tight. And I think that the BSIP money is just very front-loaded, and it's very difficult when you're very front-loaded to get good value for money. So we need to be really careful how we spend that. And the fair funding review was started under the previous governments, if you remember. And we're now being advised that this government is going to continue that review. So it's obviously the right way forward. But don't forget, we were in coalition for 5 years with the Lib Dems, and your party did nothing about it either. And Phil, yes, I know we're doing all we can regarding the flooding. I know how serious it was for your residents there and the flooding that happened there. And I know you've been in touch with Ozzy, and we'll do everything we can to support you and your residents in that area. I think we do need to do more. We can always do more. But we will continue to raise that awareness of flooding and what residents can do to protect their properties, because I think that's the way forward now. Residents need to take the action they can to prevent their properties being flooded. And Max, we may be miserable, but we are physically responsible, and we do speak the truth, as we have done for the last 23 years. And I think if you want to dictate what the leader says, you probably need to win more seats. So we're working very closely with the city about the buses. So we have a really good relationship with Sir Peter Salisbury, so we will continue to do that going forward. And Michael, yeah, the Household Support Fund is doing really good, but we need more money, and we're doing the best we can to support our residents with the funding we've got. Thank you very much, Mr Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs Taylor. Moving on to agenda item number 6, report of the Cabinet, the annual delivery report and performance compendium 2024. Mr Brecon will move, and Mr Poland will second.
Thank you, Chair. Pleased to move the annual delivery report and performance compendium 2024. It is indeed a great read, as it always has been. Great document, shows what we do as a council. To name a few: transport and infrastructure delivery, public transport, road safety, active travel, cycling and walking, community safety, economic investment, tourism, culture, libraries, heritage, broadband, our clean and green agenda, our children's services, our adult services, improving our health, our trading standards and their consumer safety services, and so many more. I've always said to all residents of Leicestershire, if you want to know what we do as your county council, this is a great place to start. It shows that our services really do affect all of our residents of our great county. Finally, please remember that we do all of this service delivery well, but it is under a growing pressure with our low comparative funding. Happy to move, Chairman. Thank you.
Mr Poland, you're seconded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I second this report. One of the strengths of this report, I think, is the way it is really easy to read. It shows in detail the breadth of activities that we do as an authority. And for anyone that's sort of interested in what we do in life in Leicestershire in more general, I would very much signpost them to this report to really get that information. I know in previous years it's been put in local libraries. I don't know if that's the case this time, but I would very much hope that it would be, because it's that sort of document you can pick up and see what we do as an authority. We have long known that we are the lowest funded county council in the country, and if we were funded at the same level as the London Borough of Camden, we would actually be £630 million a year better off. But that, for me, only goes to reinforce the achievement of us being the most cost-effective authority in England. Initial analysis of the 2023-24 year shows that of the 201 outcome metrics, over half have improved. The cost efficiency we show is no accident. It is a product of the hard work and difficult decisions of this council and our dedicated officer team. Whilst I'm certain our staff will continue to do their best in incredibly difficult financial environment, we really need a recognition of the importance of the services we provide to the people of Leicestershire from national government through proper, fair funding of our local authority. In times when funding is tight and difficult decisions need to be made, this report shows we are an authority that can get the maximum value out of every pound we spend, and the ability to do that and the understanding that hard decisions are sometimes the necessary decisions is why this council, despite our funding, is in a stronger position than many around the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Poland. Mr. Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a good report. It does show that it shows that the County Council makes the best use of its resources, and obviously we must all support the report. But could I just refer to the item 3, strong economy, transport and infrastructure. The problem we have, of course, is that however well we harness our limited resources in this county, we have to take account of the fact that this county does not stand alone. It's in the heart of the country and it's crisscrossed by roads and railways. And it's these roads and railways which simply are not receiving the investment that they need. We all know the situation. The M1 slices the county in two, and every day we see closures through one reason or another. Junction 21 is a most dangerous roundabout system to navigate at the best of times, and at times it's more like a Dodgems at the fun fair rather than a properly controlled transport system. And despite all our pleas, I don't see any plans at all on the part of National Highways or the Department of Transport to bring any improvements, any worthwhile improvements to that essential junction. In Hinckley, of course, we have the most bashed bridge in Britain, and that situation gets worse by the week. It used to be once a fortnight, and now I think it's an increasingly frequency of that. And all National Highways seem to be doing is relying on a nearby development which might or might not take place at some point next year. And some point next year, we will have seen another string of dreadful collisions and impacts along that road. And as far as railway is concerned, I cannot see, I hope I'm wrong, I've looked, but I can't see that there are any plans whatsoever to improve the infrastructure of the railways across this county. I've mentioned before that the Leicester to Birmingham trains are dangerously overcrowded, and I stand by that. I stand by that claim, and I can't see any movement. I cannot see any movement on that important cross-country route whatsoever. I believe that the electrification is going to reach Leicester at some point, but I don't know whether any plans are, whether we have actually a date for it. So I hope that by agreeing this report, we are not turning our back on the need for substantial infrastructure improvements in transport terms across the whole county. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bill. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. It is, as usual, a very full report, in great detail in much of it. It's kind of look under the bonnet of the County Council, isn't it? There's one area that has concerned me for some time, and that's the area of youth services. And there is no mention in the report anymore of youth services. The answer to that is because we no longer conduct the service that we used to in youth services. If you look at youth, you'll find that there's a lot of comment on youth justice and other forms of injustice. But that worries me, and I think that there's something that we can all put in our manifestos for the upcoming election to the County Council, is to do something about that problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Mr. Parton.
You only have to look at the performance quadrants where it's split into high performing versus the funding received. And because obviously Leicestershire is so poorly funded, we're always either we're on the right-hand side, on the top or the bottom. But when you look at the number of times we're in the top, and not only in the top of that top quadrant is quite astonishing. So, for example, performance, transport and highways, adult social care delivery, and that's incidentally in a period of time where adults and communities is very soon to be inspected by the CQC. The department is preparing as we speak for a visit in January and February. We've also got the adult social care strategy 25 to 29 going out for consultation in February and March. But then we return to performance, health, child and adult, children's social care, which of course got an outstanding in its Ofsted inspection, environment and waste. And then two examples of where factors slightly out of our hands have deteriorated, but then that the council is working towards to mitigate, is mental health. And you'll see that one declining factor was the suicide rate. But then, of course, you have to look at the fact that we've got a suicide prevention strategy, and I would urge everybody to get this consultation out to people. It runs until the 22nd of December. And the other one I noticed, something that we're all keen to pursue, is road safety, increasing casualties. Now that could possibly be because the roads have now returned to pre-COVID levels. I've never seen the roads so busy for a long time. But one only has to work with officers in highways, in our divisions, where we see issues, to see how responsive they are, along with the police. That gives me confidence that we can turn that around as well.
Thank you very much. I invite Mr. Brecken to respond to any comments.
I think I'd just say all the comments. I think on the transport issues, Junction 24, Junction 21, the pressures of the Hinckley National Rail freight, I think we're fully aware of them. I think we as a council and our environment and transport teams and our planning teams are doing all we can to, if they do go ahead, to enhance that. I think your frustrations on the railways are probably noted. I think that is this is obviously a historic report on where we've been, and I think as a county we continue to sort of move forward and get the very best we can. So Electrification, as far as I'm aware, is moving down towards Leicester. I think it's got to have a few bridges uplifted and changed around and to facilitate, obviously, the gantry infrastructures, but that is moving on. I think it's certainly down to Wigston at the moment, which is good news, and long may that continue. I think the other issues, I mean, certainly when scrutiny looked at this and also when Cabinet looked at this, I think constructive comments and frustrations really about our limitations from a funding point of view as to what we can do. But I think certainly our officers do the very best with what we've got, and certainly I'm just happy to endorse the report again, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now take a vote on the motion. All in favour, please raise your hands. Everyone. Thank you very much, members. The statement 2025-26. Mr. Brecken will move and Mr. Bedford will second.
Thank you again, Chairman. The Employment Committee at its meeting on the 26th of September considered the pay policy statement for 25-26. The decision of the Employment Committee is reflected in the motion. This is a legal requirement that it must be approved by Council and published by the 1st of April of next year. So I'm more than happy to move that the County Council's pay policy statement 25-26 as set out in the appendix to the report of the Employment Committee be approved, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brecken. Mr. Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to second the motion as printed on the order paper.
Thank you very much. Mr. Charlesworth.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just one question, please. Under special severance payments, have there been any in the past 12 months?
Mr. Brecken.
I think I'd have to look at that and come back to you, Mr. Charlesworth. I wouldn't know the answer to that straight away, but if there have been, I'm sure I can give you an answer on that. Thank you.
Favour, please raise your hands. Everybody. Thank you very much, members. Constitution Committee, Mrs. Taylor and Mr. Brecken. Mrs. Taylor will move, sorry, and Mr. Brecken will second. Over to you, Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move the two motions on the order paper, motions 1 and motions 2. Thank you.
Happy to second, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions at all? If that's the case, no one, we will move to the vote. All in favour, please raise your hands. I think...
Yes. Do it on both.
It is.
1 and motion 2.
Oh, and motion, so that's a motion 1, sorry, my fault. And motion 2. All raise your hands, please. The first one was motion 1. There's 2 motions, motion 1, so now we're raising our hands. All those in favour for motion 2. Everyone? Sorry?
Just ask if people are against it.
Yeah, we'll do. Moving on. Anyone against motion 2? Carried. Carried. Thank you very much, members. Moving on to agenda item number 9. As I said earlier, Mr. Shepherd will now take over. It may be a strange place to say this, actually, but obviously I'm not going to be here at the finish of the meeting, but wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and that goes to all members of staff and all residents of the county. Thank you very much. Mr. is on his way. Yeah.
We're now moving on to agenda item number 9, and I call on Mrs. Taylor to move, please.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Chairman. I move the motion on the order paper. As a county council, we were already dreading the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October, ahead of the date after most of the information had already been leaked, but it got a lot worse. In broad terms, this was a budget of big tax rises and big borrowing. Tax is now on a path to be 38.2 of GDP, its highest level ever in the UK. We're now set to borrow 28 billion more in 2025-26 than previously planned, and to spend 19 billion more on public investment. Around a third of the extra borrowing is going towards higher day-to-day spending, but borrowing comes with costs. You have to pay it back. And you do that through revenue, meaning you have less to spend on public services. As a council, we have lived within our means over the past 23 years of the Conservatives running this council, and we have had to take some tough decisions. But we've always protected those most in need in Leicestershire. We could have borrowed millions to do much more. We are aware that borrowing comes at a cost. We were not prepared to put Leicestershire residents at risk, like the Chancellor is putting our country at risk. As a council, we are set to borrow an average of 85 billion over the next 4 years in the hope that, the government is planning to borrow an extra 85 billion over the next 4 years in the hope that more funding from public services in the next couple of years, more public investment throughout the Parliament will more than offset the costs. These costs, according to the OBR, will result in higher inflation and higher interest rates, more than we would have otherwise have seen. A lot hinges on how well the government spends the money. The additional investment is extremely front-loaded, which runs the risk of a big impact of cash for a couple of years and then we fall off the cliff. Something we have sensibly avoided in Leicestershire with the adults running this council and being physically responsible. The biggest revenue raiser was an excessively significant increase in employer national insurance contributions, both through an increase in the rate and a sharp reduction in the earnings threshold at which employers start paying. The OBR suggests that 3/4 of the impact of employers' national insurance contributions will be felt by employees, even if the changes don't show up on page slips. Indeed, these tax rises partly explain why the OBR has downgraded its projection for real household income growth over the next few years. Somebody will pay for the higher taxes, largely working people. The employer NI rise will further increase the incentive for employers to switch to contracting with the self-employed. One of my deepest concerns is for charities and the third sector. I've heard firsthand the enormous impact the national insurance increases and the national living wage will have on the sector. The 6.7 rise in the national living wage and the increase in employer national insurance contributions to 15% and the reduction of the threshold, both effective from the 1st of April 2025, will bring significant financial pressures for charities. Whilst fair wages are essential, these rising costs will intensify the triple squeeze charities face from increasing costs, reduced funding and higher demand. Smaller charities in particular may have to swift already limited resources away from those essential services, putting the communities they support at risk. We have many great charities and volunteer groups within Leicestershire, and I know they're already talking about having to reduce frontline support, taking away much needed support from vulnerable people. Was this Labour's plan all along, or did they really not look at the impact these increases would have on the sector? My guess is it was both. The winter fuel cuts are again impacting the most vulnerable. Charities of the third sector are the front line at supporting these pensioners. That is why we've given £4,000 to Age UK, Leicestershire and Rutland to help them as they're now overwhelmed with people asking for help. It comes to something when in 2024 the best policy option left for older people on tight budgets is to hope and pray for a mild winter. But even if the weather is kind, we know that millions will face impossible choices over how to make their money stretch far enough to keep them fed and warm during the colder months. The government's cut to winter fuel payment is coming in too quickly and hitting far too many older people. And their decision not to right the wrong in this budget is a source of enormous regret. For businesses, the increase in the main national insurance contributions will have the biggest impact from the budget in the short term. The changes to employer national insurance and minimum wage, with the national living wage hourly rising from £11.44 to £12.21 from April 2025. Labour painted themselves into a corner by committing to not increase the key revenue-raising taxes. So they've had to fudge their way out of it and completely misread and misunderstood the impact these choices have had. The Institute of Economic Affairs, commenting on the 16% increase in the national living wage paid to 18 to 20-year-olds, said this measure will add to the other costs imposed by employers right explicitly in the budget or implicitly as a result of the new work rights. This extra pressure on smaller employers is likely to send some to the wall. While in the long term it may lead employers to automate many jobs, to contract work out to the self-employed, or to switch production to other countries. Doesn't sound good for Britain. The proposed changes to inheritance tax with the restriction of the agricultural property relief and the business property relief to 1 billion at 100% and 50% thereafter from the 6th of April 2026 creates a new and potential very material risk for family businesses in particular. In these cases, the funding of inheritance tax liability will be unpredictable in terms of timing and will typically need to come from the businesses themselves. As a rural county, we've heard from many farmers about this budget, how this budget will have an enormous impact on them and for many generations to come. The budget will add to the cost of producing food at a time when hard-pressed British farmers cannot absorb it, meaning even the supply chain or consumers will end up bearing the brunt. The impact on British family farms already stretched to breaking point off a decade of tightening margins. Cost inflation and extreme weather events could be the final straw for many. NFU President Tom Bradshaw said, "This budget not only threatens family farms, but will also make producing food more expensive. This means more costs for farmers who simply cannot absorb it, and it will have to be borne by someone. Farmers are down to the bone and gristle. Who is going to carry these costs?" It's been a bad budget for farm confidence, which is already at an all-time low. And today, after farmers, including tenants, have had more uncertainty and more worry, not left. When you look farmers in the eye, make a promise to keep it, the shameless break in these promises on agricultural property relief will snatch away much of the next generation's ability to continue producing British food, plan for the future, and shepherd the environment. It's clear the government doesn't understand that family farms are not only small farms, but they're just because a farm is a valuable asset. It doesn't mean that those who work it are wealthy. Let's not sugarcoat this. Every penny the Chancellor saves from this will come directly from the next generation having to break up their family farms. Near I say any more. Back to here in the Council and the direct hand part of this budget right here in this chamber. MHCLG issued a policy statement on the 28th of November. It noted 1.3 billion extra for local government. Sounds a vast number, but when you dig down beneath the headlines, it's very bleak down there, especially county councils like Leicestershire. The way the government intends to distribute resources will be concerning for many county and unitary councils. The increases in the minimum wage and the national insurance contributions will more than wipe out the extra funds promised for social care. The newly called recovery grant will be heavily targeted and weighed exclusively by deprivation. We are extremely disappointed that the government has chosen to repurpose some grants and distribute this funding elsewhere, which would adversely impact rural counties like ourselves. While deprivation is a key indicator of a council's need, it is not the only indicator, nor the most important measure of financial distress. The reality is that it is demand and market failure across adults and social care and special education needs that are pushing councils to the brink. The CCM previous analysis shows county authorities have a larger funding gap than metropolitan boroughs next year. By directing this additional money solely through the deprivation key indicator, those councils most in need, like ourselves, will not see any benefit for our residents. Our council deserves an appropriate share of the recovery grant. The way these funds next year are to be distributed do not adequately account for many under-pressure councils, actuals and future demands and costs. And with the government also committing to a fairer funding review, I'm generally concerned if this is the direction of travel moving forward. The government must ensure that this review is a generally fair funding review and based on a robust and independent evidence-based. Just to come to an end, Chairman, I'll just give you some estimates of the additional cost for this council from the budget for the next financial year. 5 million additional costs for us as an employer for the national insurance increases, 12 million for the increase in national living wage. No mention of the Net Worth North money. this was fully funded by the previous government. This £238 million of funding is desperately needed to fund all our highway pressures. Without it, our highways will be crumbling. 17 million to social care providers to cover their national insurance and national living wage increase. And that is on top of the years of underfunding. Despite being the lowest funded county, we are the top performing and efficient and lean. If we funded the same as Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, our very near neighbours, we would have £100 million more in funding each year. So we wait for the final settlement just before Christmas. So happy Christmas to all our residents. We will continue to fight for the funding you deserve, to fund the services and support you deserve, as we've done so for the last 23 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's now Mr. Brecken to second the motion.
Yeah, happy to second and reserve my remarks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a list here that are wishing to speak, and the first on the list is Mr. Poland. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Chairman. Whilst the budget on the 30th of October had a lot in it that should concern reasonable-minded people, it is the most left-wing and politically motivated budget I can remember in many a year. One thing that particularly concerned me, I wanted to talk about today, was the farmers' tax. The farmers' tax really portrays a lack of understanding of how our rural economy works. The fact is that farmers go out in all weathers, all times of year, 365 days a year, working hard to keep our food production safe. Okay, without safety of a food supply chain, we have no safety at all. As we've talked about in this place and in others, yes, some of these assets, because of the land value, may be worth more than £1 million, £3 million, but while you're asset rich, you are cash poor. The land is worth that money, but you don't have that in your pocket to spend, okay? So that requires, in order to liquefy that, you would have to sell that land, reducing the size of family farms and putting that industry at risk forever. This deeply concerns me and should concern anyone that values our rural way of life, values the family farms that ensure food production in the future and have ensured food production for decades and in some cases centuries. This is vital that this farmers' tax is something that is repealed, and that we have two members of Parliament in here, and I would appeal to them to really represent our farmers in Parliament, speak up for those small businesses, for those families that are the backbone of our food production in this country, and to ensure that for the next generations and the generations after, the farming way of life that has been the backbone of our county and our country continues on. I would like to also just to pay tribute as well to the farmers leading the campaign against this, and in particular Simon Orson from Melton, who's done some sterling work in organising opposition to this. It is vital this is turned round and that our food security is secured for generations to come.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. So today I rise to express my deep concern and frustration at this Labour government's reckless mismanagement, which is leaving our country, our communities and our constituents worse off. Labour have had 14 years in opposition to come up with a coherent plan for government. 14 years to develop strategies to grow their economy, support families, protect vital services, and in just 14 weeks, they've managed to cripple the country. Their first budget since 2010 has delivered its largest tax increase in history, £40 billion worth of additional taxation, as confirmed by the OBR and the Institute for Fiscal Studies. This isn't a bad budget, it's a betrayal. It's a hammer blow for hard-working families and businesses in Leicestershire. The 1.2% hike in employers' national insurance contributions, the reduction of the NI threshold to 5,000 and the 6.7% rise in national living wage will add £20 million to this council's costs. That's £20 million diverted away from delivering the services to our residents. This impact doesn't stop at the doors of County Hall either. contractors, care providers, supply chains and charities like Age UK are now scrambling to stay afloat, all because of Labour's short-sighted decisions. And then we have the family farm tax. By imposing 20% inheritance tax on farm holdings over £1 million, this policy will not only destroy our rural families, but it will also jeopardise food production, security and jobs. Farmers are not rich landowners creaming off profits. They are the custodians of the countryside. The land is worthless because they hand it down to the next generation. They are not, for the most part, interested in selling. They often work for less than the minimum wage. They are the backbone of our rural economy. This policy will push them to the edge, threatening our nation's food security at a time when we can least afford it. This policy is a direct betrayal of what is promised to the NFU during the run-up to the election. Now, in my division of Colville North, it's been particularly badly bruised, with the cancellation of funding to reopen the Ivanhoe line, a project that had reached the brink of success under the previous government's Restoring Our Railways programme. Local politicians of all parties, alongside campaigners, have worked tirelessly to bring this project to fruition. Labour's decision to pull the funding has at best set the project back by years, but more than likely buried it forever. This is a betrayal of my community's efforts as a direct attack on connectivity, opportunity and progress for North West Leicestershire. Now, I do note and welcome that the new Labour MPs for North West Leicestershire and South Derbyshire are lobbying their own government, to come up with a new pot of funding. But let's not sugarcoat this. That's like praising the driver who you've just run over for stopping to see if you're still alive. Labour claims that they want to drive economic growth, but their actions tell a very, very different story. From skyrocketing taxes to stifling of investments, hammering local services and businesses, crippling family farms, threatening the nation's food security, they are plunging our country into stagnation and despair. I welcome this motion, and this council must do everything that it can to demand that the government reverses these tax increases, scraps the family farm tax, compensates councils fairly for these punitive costs, and restores funding for the Ivanhoe line. Colleagues, I welcome the people who are elected us here deserve better than this government's broken promises and economic mismanagement. I wholeheartedly support this motion and encourage colleagues from across the chamber to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Bedford, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there's not really much more I can add to Councillor Smith's speech there. There are just 2 points that I'd like to add. I know that our Leicestershire MPs are very concerned about this issue, and many of us have already written to the Chancellor about aspects of the budget that we find unpalatable, particularly the national insurance hike and the inheritance tax changes to farming, which is going to damage not just the farming industry in Leicestershire, but broadly across the country, and will damage our food security. Turning first to the national insurance point, I've had many conversations with surgeries, dental practices, healthcare providers in my division of Markfield, Desford and Thornton, and they have many concerns about the changes of the budget in respect to national insurance thresholds. The lowering of the threshold to £5,000 sounds like quite a trifling thing to do, but actually its impact is huge, because it means now that national insurance contributions by those healthcare providers have gone up by tens of thousands of pounds. So I do know that surgeries, dental practices, those that provide healthcare are thinking twice about whether they're going to employ someone else in their surgery to deliver those frontline services. So that's a real concern to me and to my residents. The second point I want to raise relates to the farming issue that Councillor Smith there just raised. Our farmers do a sterling job for us. This is about a number of things. I know the government wants to pitch this as being against wealthy landowners. Let's sting the rich. Let's get as much money as we can from the wealthy. Actually, a lot of this wealth is tied up in land. Farmers don't make a lot of money day to day. Cash flows aren't at the levels that the government think they are. So I very much hope the government does reconsider its position on this. And I know I've had representations from Midlands farmers who I think they're doing their own demonstration on the 9th of December at 11:30 in Melton Mowbray Town Centre on this issue, because I think they believe, like I do, that this policy will damage food security. It'll impact all of us. You know, we may not have a personal interest in the farming industry, but we all have an interest in food. So I wholeheartedly support this motion today.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Bray, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. I do support the motion, or some of the aspects in it, and particularly concerns about winter fuel payments, concerns about national insurance changes, impact on farming, etc. I have to say I do find some of the speeches we've heard so far today slightly hard to take. There does seem to have been an outbreak of amnesia since July the 4th from the party of Liz Truss. And you know, and I've listened very carefully to some of the comments, particularly some of the comments from the County Council's leadership about farming. And what I would say gently but importantly to the acting leader is a more pressing and potentially devastating impact to a number of our farms is the County Council's administration's policy of selling off the county farms. You know, for example, in Mr. Bill's patch, the popular Middlefield Moo Juice is facing an uncertain future because of the County Council's policy on, you know, the inheritance tax is not going through their mind at the moment because they might be out on their ear because the County Council is earmarked their farm for sale. So what I would say is, whilst I will support the motion today, if you really care about farming, I would certainly think, I would urge you to revisit that particular disastrous policy.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. Merry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. The Labour promise not to raise national insurance, VAT and income tax during the election campaign and change people's pay slips is simply not true. The national insurance increase on businesses is having a knock-on effect with recruitment freezes, lower pay increases and catastrophic effect on businesses. Them words are not mine, the catastrophic effect on businesses. They were recently made by Tom Courage. And people don't know who he is. He's a top chef and he does the food for Marks and Spencer's, and I recommend the beef cheeks. They're very nice. But he's having a bit of buyer's remorse because he was one of the 120 business leaders who signed the letter during the general election campaign supporting Labour's plans for the economy. And I've lost count out of the 120 how many are having the buyer's remorse. I won't mention the effect on doctors, surgeries, chemists and dentists that's been done by my good colleague, Councillor Bedford. Thank you very much indeed. But only recently, the Institute of Directors Economic Confidence Index plummets from a 3-year high in July of +7 to -12. You couldn't make this up. So I'd like to finish on a quote. Never in the field of government has so much damage been done to UK economy in such a short period of time by so few politicians, and I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Mullaney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you go through the motion, all of the issues listed in the motion are ones we can support. Liberal Democrats are not supportive of the national insurance employers rise that will hit councils as well as businesses. And the change to inheritance tax on farms, again, is one that could have that devastating effect on our agricultural industry. So obviously we share those concerns as well. However, we shouldn't forget where this motion is coming from, which is from the Conservative Party, and they raise how this government is apparently damaging agriculture whilst forgetting the botched trade deals with Australia and New Zealand, which hit agriculture and were criticised strongly at the time by the National Farmers Union. On the tax burden, there was a record increase in the burden of taxation in the last Parliament, from 33 to 36%, the highest increase in one Parliament since 1950. We had chaos in government, ministers resigning every 5 minutes. I think 40 or 50 ministers resigned in a period of 48 hours, and we had 3 Tory prime ministers in 3 months. We had the economy crashed under Liz Truss that put lots of people's mortgages up. The reality is, whilst there are things that we can criticise the Labour government for doing in the few months they've been in power, the reality is people haven't forgotten the Tories' record, particularly in the last years in government. The reality is the Conservatives have to realise that when they attack Labour for what they're doing over the last few months, people say, well, yes, but what about your record in the last few years in government? And all these attacks on Labour do is push people away from Labour and the Tories to other parties. And the key to Conservative success historically, the key to Conservative success has been to unite the right-wing vote. Throughout history, it was unassailable in winning over the right-wing vote. The reality now is it has another party which is rising very strongly and winning over the right-wing vote. So when the Conservatives say, well, Labour's done a bad job in the last few months, all people say is, well, yeah, but you did a bad job in the last few years, and all that does is encourage support to reform. And what we will say is, yes, Labour have made mistakes, but the last few years of Conservative government was marred by incompetence and chaos and failure to deliver, with record levels of immigration, of waits in A&E, of waits for GP appointments, of waits for ambulances, and a complete failure to deliver in those last few years in government. So whilst we in the Lib Dem group disagree with some of what the Labour government will do, including the things listed in this motion, which is why we will support it, we haven't forgotten the disastrous record, particularly of the last few years of the Conservative government, and people out there haven't forgotten that either.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. Some of us may recall the last Labour government, when they were in power, 2010, they left a note saying there was no money left. I think that was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury at the time. Someone earlier, I think from the Labour team, said that there was an experiment. So yeah, this is the tip of their anti-growth socialist experiment, and it can only get worse, in my view. And, you know, I'm supporting this motion, but there's lots of things, other things we could have put in this motion. And Mr. Mullaney talks about residents haven't forgotten. Well, they haven't forgotten your party's sellout on tuition fees when you were in coalition government, or your incompetence, or your minister's incompetence in handling the scandal of the post office and their scheme, their IT system, and the fact they couldn't be bothered to... Anyway, so people haven't forgotten that either. But let's just go through some of the other things that the Labour government is hell-bent on persecuting people in this country for taxes. So first of all, they're going to impose VAT from 1st of January on independent education fees, and also remove business rates exemption on registered charities. One of the bizarre consistencies in this is that if you have a music lesson taught inside the school, you'll pay VAT. But if you have a music lesson that's taught outside the school, you won't pay VAT. How's that for increasing the confusion? So what we're looking at is that across the country, thousands, tens of thousands of children are going to have to move halfway through the school year, disrupting their GCSEs and A-levels, and that's going to be hundreds in Leicestershire, I expect. That is going to have an effect. That's going to increase class sizes, going to cause all sorts of disruption to those children who've already suffered disruption because of the pandemic and all those other things. What else has the Labour government done? Well, they've released prisoners early. They've managed to collapse business confidence. They've increased borrowing, national borrowing, and that means interest rates, interest payments by the government are going to become eye-watering, painful, and interest rates are going to remain high. Inflation's increasing and going to keep increasing. As I said, it can only get worse. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mr. Allen, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Chairman. I think we can all agree that this was a dreadful budget driven by Labour's union paymasters, which penalises everyone who owns something or wishes to better themselves and their children through work and enterprise. In terms of the farming tax, perhaps the plan is to nationalise farms after they've done the railways and the utilities. In particular, I note with concern the impacts of the national insurance changes on local charities, such as Age UK. In my former role as chairman of Earl Shilton Town Council, I'm well aware of the financial pressures on charities such as Age UK. As members may be aware, the Age UK Centre in Earl Shilton was faced with an imminent threat of closure due to financial challenges and practical considerations. I understand and pleased to say that following long and productive negotiations between Age UK and the Town Council, a new lease and operating model has been agreed to ensure the future of this very valuable facility to the residents of Earl Shilton. This is despite scaremongering by local Liberal Democrats, which came very close to derailing those discussions. I just want to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do think you lot have been really mean to the Labour lot. Yeah, they're doing wonderful things. I mean, you know, Mr. Bill talked about not protecting the railways. Well, they have. They gave a inflation-busting pay rise to train drivers with no productivity increases. I read only yesterday that, weirdly, the national insurance increase for train companies will be covered by central government when we can't be bothered to do the same for hospices and dentists, etc. You talk about them being mean to asset-rich people. Well, they're not. One of our Leicestershire MPs, who happens to be a minister, lives in a £4 million townhouse in London, but claimed £3,800 to heat her constituency house in Leicester last year. So winter fuel allowance does exist. It exists for ministers who've got no end of assets. So one would have thought that they could lead by example and say, we won't take these benefits, we give them to people. How Labour expects somebody earning just over £13,000 a year on a pension to manage to heat their house is beyond me. It really is. No one would have objected if Labour had come out and said anyone who earns over the increased limits, pay 40% tax, wouldn't get it, but anyone below should. They say that everything has to be means tested, but mysteriously, school breakfast clubs won't be means tested. If you're a multi-millionaire, your child will still get a free breakfast. So it really is strange that we have a government. I mean, thank goodness the Chancellor is an economist. Just think how bad it would have been had she not been an economist and the mess we might have been in. So I think Labour really need to have a close look at themselves. They should be the party that protect the most vulnerable in our society. But what I would tell them, the party who cares about the most vulnerable in our society are sitting this side of the chamber and will always protect the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Harrison, please.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. It's been an interesting debate with quite different points of view. People reaching into the back ears of another government, different political points of views from the Liberal group, trying to create a platform for themselves. I understand all that. I look on this as like a charge sheet, Mr. Chairman. This is factual, actual. This is real. This is what they've done. This is the result of their business and determination to run the country in the way that they feel is right and appropriate. This is dangerous and causing real hardship. And I don't think the Labour people realise. I spent an hour on a Zoom meeting with Age UK this morning about trying to set up an organisation or a promotion to try and help raise some money for the vulnerable people in the town that I live in. And that's going to be happening all across the country because we've got to do things to try and help those who have no ability, no resource, nobody to help them. Age UK are now filling in how many pages of documents that the average person won't be able to deal with. There's lots of vulnerable people. Only in my division in Ibstock, I was told of a man of 84 years of age sitting in a room with a little heater and an overcoat and a cap on. It's just absolutely pathetic. But this charge sheet is absolutely right. And if we're in a court of law, Mr. Chairman, I'd promote you to the judge. I think us as a jury would find them guilty. This is the evidence. This isn't political swaggering. This is a reality. That's the truth. This is the sheet. This is what we say they have committed their energies and their policies to. And the result is, I think the population would find them guilty. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong in every aspect, whether you're talking of farms or the increases to our costs here. Just imagine £20 million. I mean, we all know how difficult our time has been trying to manage our budgets. 20 million extra just like that through irresponsibility from somebody who was in charge of a complaint centre and now is some great financial wizard. It's just absolute mockery, and it's wrong and it's dangerous. And I hope that, well, I'm confident that we will vote in favour of this, but I think we ought to be more reactive in our communities and talk to people, because lots of people need help, and we ought to be all doing that, because this is so important. So, Mr. Deputy Chairman, I'm delighted to support this, but I'm just saddened with all the frivolity and all the messing around and excuses. This is what we're talking about, and it's serious, and we need to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Mr. Grimley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. I'm really concerned about the national insurance extra contribution on the businesses, both large and small, in my division of Birstall. Particularly concerned about the retail sector, which is, with large energy bills, is teetering on the sort of borderline at the moment. But looking further afield, I do work in construction. That's what I do for my day job. The construction sector is largely seen as being the barometer of the economy. So I was interested to read a article posted by Procon Leicestershire, which is the property and construction organisation here. The headline starts, budget burdens threaten to push businesses to the brink. New tax burdens introduced in the latest budget could tip even more businesses into financial distress. An expert from Shakespeare, Marto, has warned. What I'm hearing from small businesses, both in Birstall and also around the construction sector, they are really worried about these new national insurance burdens. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Payne, please.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman. Unsurprisingly, I will support this budget. And before I come to my main point, I just want to clear up. Gilt rates are actually about 4.45%, the 10-year gilt rate, which is about the same as at the height of the Trussonomics period. So the notion that, you know, there's a complete collapse of the economy, well, the gilt rates are at the same level as they were then, right now. Just going beneath the radar, by the way. I do want to pick up on the national insurance. I've always found it a bit perverse that there is a jobs tax per se, but to increase that jobs tax and make it harder for businesses to employ people, and which we all know is the livelihood and the blood of any individual, a good job, I just think is absolutely perverse. I've come from a briefing with some economists, not Rachel Reeves, the administrator, but I have come from a briefing from some proper economists this morning. And they've told me that the NI increase, employers' NI, on some businesses, well, most businesses, would be about £610 per employee. That's a huge amount. Moving to the motion, I'll support it, but and I buy into all of the arguments that have already been made about agricultural relief, but we haven't talked much about business property relief, which is similar to agricultural relief and comes under the same, if you like, policy that the budget has moved forward. The truth is, I don't know how many farms are in Leicestershire,
but I know there's about 42,000 businesses in Leicestershire, and a good many of them have a net worth above £1 million or a net asset value of above £1 million. Many of these businesses have been nurtured and grown and are minded of tradesmen in Leicestershire who have passed those skills on to their children, who have come into the business, and it's always been, if you like, acknowledged that the journey will be to let their children one day take over the business and carry out those trades. Now, we're in short supply of tradesmen generally, and this is just one example, but it just seems perverse that business property relief will now be halved, and therefore there'll be literally a business tax imposed on these families that have nurtured and grown these businesses, which provide services that we all benefit from in the future. Now, business property relief was introduced in 1976 to stop businesses being sold off, liquidated to pay the taxes. I don't see what's changed today, and I just think it's a real regressive step that the government have made. So I do support the motion, but there doesn't seem to be much mention of business property relief in the motion, but I note that the mover, the Deputy Leader, did mention it in her opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Ashman, please.
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I'll keep it short because I obviously support the motion. I think it'll be pointless because they're not listening. They weren't listening through the debate. They're not listening at Parliament. It doesn't matter how long the list grows, whether it's Marks and Spencer's, B&Q, Sainsbury's, Tom Kerridge, organisations like Barclays and HSBC that initially supported the budget have now said it's terrible. They're not listening. There isn't a single member of the Cabinet who has worked in the private sector. They don't get business, they don't get the rural economy, they don't get rural people. They won't listen until it goes very badly wrong. So I support the motion, but I'm afraid I feel very depressed because I don't think they've listened to a word we've said.
Thank you. And now, Mr. Meyer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've heard a lot of rhetoric and a lot of hot air from the parties opposite. Yes, the government is raising national insurance for the largest employers, but I just want to put some facts out there. It's also raising the employment allowance, which is protecting the smallest business. Half of businesses will pay the same or less than they did previously. So when you're talking about half or less, that means half, the smaller end of the scale will pay less than they did previously, or pay the same. 250,000 of the smallest businesses will see their national insurance tax bill fall. So these are the facts, Mr. Chairman. This is not something that I've made up. You can Google it and you can find it yourself, okay? And from the tax revenue, the government will invest it in our public services. That's what Rachel Reeves have said. That's what the government have said. The reason we're raising taxes is because of the mess left by the previous Conservative government. The defunding of national institutions and the NHS, that's why we need the money to put that back in. But I think we've forgotten COVID. Remember the vast billions and billions given out in COVID and lost in fraud. That's what we have to cover by raising these taxes. Okay. The government has said it will compensate local government for its direct national insurance costs, so it will be cost neutral for the council on that level, and we'll get more of a briefing on the 11th, I believe, of December. I think we had the invite today, and on the 17th, the draft budget will be introduced to the council, and we can all have a look at exactly how much we've been covered for the national insurance increase. Personally, I've asked the Director of Finance, Declan, if we can have a look at it as well, because we want to make sure on this side that everything is okay for finances in Leicestershire. We're as concerned as everybody else. But to sum up, public at the general election wanted those with the broadest shoulder to pay more, and that's exactly what is happening. People's pay slips are protected. Government has made sure of that, and no tax rises are being raised that will impact people's pay slips. It's going to come on the 1st of April, I believe, this tax rising. But there's no other taxes, no other national insurance that will impact that pay slip. In fact, what will happen is national minimum wage will go up. And so people will get more in their pay slips. My residents are content. I've not had any emails regarding employers' national insurance. A lot of my friends own small businesses. What they've found is actually the allowance going up to £100,000 before they have to start paying the national insurance makes a lot of small businesses more viable than they were previously. Okay, and if you have 3 or 4 employees, you're much more in than you were before. But I just want to move on to the farmers as well, because we've had a lot about the farmers, and it's all about this inheritance tax and what it means. And the thing is that unless you're about $1 million to $3.5 million, depending if you're married or not, this national insurance, this tax won't kick in. This inheritance tax won't kick in. It's only for farms that are over £3.5 million, I would say. And you know, how many of them are in Leicestershire? Maybe a handful a year will make change hands. The working's out there. I can send links to colleagues here because it's very detailed, but you need to understand that it's only going to impact a handful of farms here in Leicestershire. I think the government have quoted about 550 odd farms it might affect nationally. But what it does stop, it stops people like Jeremy Clarkson buying up farms to dodge inheritance tax. And that's one of the things. You know, we saw it in the video, the 2021, I believe, where he says, you know, I bought up farms so I can dodge inheritance tax. You know, that's fact. But the important thing is that it's what this budget affects. And this budget, and what they're talking, what this motion affects. This motion is about millionaire, multimillionaire farmers, millionaire, multimillionaire big businesses on one side, which the Conservatives want to represent. Mr. Chairman, I sat here and I listened. Compared to what Mr. Ashman said, I listened carefully. And here I say some facts and I say my opinion and they're booing. It's like pantomime season, isn't it? So, no, please do have the respect. If it's your motion and you want us to vote on it and we've listened, please have the respect when somebody else of a different opinion stands up and says something different. Okay, so coming back to the farms. So we have the Conservatives and, unfortunately, our Liberal Democrat colleagues on one hand saying that we'll look after multi-millionaire farmers. But that's fine. We'll look after everybody else. We'll look after the small people. We'll look after the residents that are struggling. Don't worry about that. When the ballot boxes on May the 1st next year comes up, we'll be there. We'll be reminding people that actually we're on your side. You know, when they stood up and put the motion on to protect farmers over £3.5 million, we're the one that stood in your corner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Meir.
Cheers.
That's Mr. O'Shea.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I've just listened to that. You're protecting the vulnerable. You're protecting the people on low wages. What about the taxes that you're doing? And you're actually dropping the fuel tax from people that are just above the credit limit. Don't come here and tell us that you're looking after the people that they're not the millionaires. We don't bother about the millionaires with that tax. No, but what we're saying is, no, I'm not out of order. What I'm telling you is you're out of order because at the end of the day, you're saying that you're helping the communities across the country. You're not.
Gentlemen, in the immortal words of somebody more eminent than I am, I'm keen to hear what the Speaker says.
Thank you. Basically, my concern is that we're not, you know, we've got Labour over there giving us a lecture, and we've got people that are just above the limits that have not going to be able to get a Christmas with heat because we're taking away the fuel tax. That's one thing. But to listen to say that they're looking after everybody is an absolute crying shame, because you're not. You're looking after yourselves in government, yes, but you're not looking after the vulnerable, the people that we want to be looking after. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Right, that's the end, I think, now of... Is there one more speaker that wanted to come? I see Mrs. Seaton's hand up. Mr. Phillimore. Mr. Phillimore as well, I've seen. Thank you.
I wasn't going to speak today at all. I was listening to all the debate by people that are far, far cleverer than I am about fiscal this and so on and so forth. I'm not made that way, but I am more practical. I represent farmers. I don't represent multi-millionaires. I represent farmers in South Crowson and Barkby, Beeby, all of the smaller developments like that are worried. They're panicking about this. Now, these are the farmers that come litter picking with me on a Sunday. They're not multi-million. They're not Jeremy Clarkson. They're not any of those. They are genuinely worried. Their families are worried about what will happen to their farm in future. Over the years, yes, they've built up their land, the purchasing of land, they've inherited it from the grandpa onwards, and it's gone down the families. And they've done this because they wanted to preserve their part of the countryside and look after the countryside. They have so many things farmers have to do these days about the hedges, the sides of the fields to make it environmentally friendly. They have to do so much for our environment that you don't really necessarily understand. And I certainly don't. I just think they've got wheat in the field. But it's not just that. It's the hedges. It's the hedgerows. It's all of this things that they have to preserve and think about all the time. None of them that I know are multi-millionaires. They are worried about their future and their family's future, and they would like to be able to hand that farm down. So they may be land rich, but not anything else. So, as I say, it just made my blood boil when you're talking about multimillionaires, and I only wish I knew some of them.
Thank you. Mr. Phillimore, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chairman. I just want to... passionate debate is great. That's what democracy is all about, and we are here to represent our communities and residents. But I'm just going to refer to one of the comments that Mr. Meyer passed, because I believe he said 250,000 small businesses will pay less. That's fine. The problem is there's 5.5 million SME businesses in the United Kingdom who, I guess that means 5.25 million will pay more. I rest my case, Mr. Deputy Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Hunt, please. Yes. Sorry, is it a point of order or point of information, Mr. Meyer? Point of information. Okay. Clarification. Okay. That's an interesting nuance.
Thank you. You're misrepresenting what I've said. I said half of businesses will pay the same or less. So if you're taking your 5.5 million, that's 2.5 million, 2.25 million will pay less or the same, okay? And of that, 250,000 of the smallest businesses will see the national insurance tax bill fall. That's the clarification, because he assumed it was different, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So now, Mr. Hunt, please.
Thanks, Chair. The Labour Group abstained on last Council's motion because it wasn't about Leicestershire, it was about sore heads after losing the general election. So here we are again, and we will abstain on this. We don't think this is about Leicestershire, we think it's about what you read in the Daily Mail last week. Basically, that's what I've heard. And, you know, none of you know very much about farming. I know that. I know Joe Orson isn't. He's one who does. And so it's simply a recital, without listening to each other much, about what they've last read in the Tory press. So we all know that the government's finances are in a very difficult position. There are some very difficult priorities to set when you set a budget. This particular issue, it hurts the very rich people who invest in farms because they no longer have to pay inheritance. In the future, they will have to pay inheritance, but not as much as you and I, only 20%. So it's a much more complex issue than I've certainly heard, but I've heard some very good speeches from our Liberal friends here who make a very good point, that you've completely forgotten the mess that you left us, that that Labour is having to cope with. Yeah. Neither, Chair, have we heard any of the things that you'd like to stop providing in terms of the National Health Service, in terms of social care, in terms of all the services that we provide. And we provide basically, we provide them on a means-tested basis. Mr. Ozzie, over there. And finally is the point, look, you've lost the general election. It's hard losing, particularly for you guys, because you always assume that you're in charge, don't you? But, you know, by continuing harping back to what is essentially an old debate, you're not moving forward. And as Mr. Mullaney said, you're making way for people who are populist, who are far to the right than most of you, and will take advantage of the tactics you're playing. We are not going to put up with another one of these debates criticising the government, not mentioning Leicestershire, particularly when you've had the opportunity to discuss the whole of what we provide in Leicestershire in the compendium report. None of you spoke on that. You probably haven't read it. It's an enormously difficult document to read, I tell you. But you had the opportunity to discuss Leicestershire, and you spent the whole afternoon talking about what you last read in the Daily Mail. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt. Now I'm...
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chairman. I think for Max, this motion is based on the impact that this new government has affected this county of Leicestershire in their first 6 months in office. So I think that's why the motion's clearly brought. Holding the budget before Halloween should have been a clear signal that a nightmare was about to unfold. Despite Keir Starmer clearly stating that he had no plans to raise taxes beyond the manifesto commitments, only 118 days later, taxes were being put on the course to hit over 38% of national income and exceeding the previous record set in 1948. What is staggering is that the Labour Party knew that this approach would not be acceptable to the British public. In 2017, a politician by the name of Jeremy Corbyn put forward a manifesto containing £43 billion worth of tax increases, and the public then were right to reject this approach then, and they are right to be angry about this approach being taken now by the government. What is more concerning than the lack of transparency shown is the lack of coherence in policy making. For a self-proclaimed pro-growth party of the workers, the budget achieves exactly the opposite. The National Insurance changes reduce incentives to hire and disproportionately so for the entry-level roles, while simultaneously fueling inflation just as it was getting under control. The government promised to listen to the Office of Budget Responsibility, but clearly they have not listened when told that their plans will crowd out the private sector, leaving business investment lower as a result of this budget. Shortly after the budget was announced, Rachel Reeves publicly stated that she is not coming back with more borrowing or taxes. And then, only 6 days later, Keir Starmer undermined his own Chancellor by refusing to confirm that position. I think it's fair to say that not only is this side of the chamber concerned, but the officers of this county council are concerned about what is to come. And certainly as lead member, I dread to think what will come next. The settlement does not bode well for Leicestershire and this county council as the lowest funded council in England. Works by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, working with the local authority networks, have given our simulations, and we don't expect it to be good news coming forward over the next few weeks. With that, I'm happy to second that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Taylor to reply to the debate, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Just a couple of things to mention. Just want to say thank you to all my members on this side for all their input, and I think you can tell by their comments they've actually done their research themselves and actually read the information that's out there for all to read about what this budget is likely to be the impact for Leicestershire. I see 3 Lib Dem members have left. They've obviously got somewhere much more important to be than actually being here, listening to this debate and voting on this motion and representing their members in their constituencies. And I think, you know, the Labour group, as I was delivering my opening, they were whispering and laughing. They obviously weren't listening. I think Robert is exactly right. They weren't listening, and I think they've finally realised that governing is quite difficult, and you have to make decisions that you probably don't want to make, but you have to stand by those decisions and not try and back them away and stand there giggling in the wings. Stuart, just about selling off the farms, I think your view of our rural farm policy is not quite accurate, but I'm very happy to have a conversation out of this meeting and arrange a briefing for you so you can understand further, so please do get in touch with me after the meeting and I'm happy to arrange that for you. And Michael, thank you for saying that the Lib Dems are going to supporting the motion. I do appreciate that, but I do think you just kind of admitted defeat at the next election, so you know, good luck to you. Just a couple of facts as well. The NFU have said that 75% of family farms will be affected by the IHT, so that's what they've said, and I'm sure they have much more information than any of us in this room. And just to put in context what the cost to this council will be, Max said you want it back to Leicestershire. We're looking like we're going to be £20 million worth off. So just to put that in perspective, the whole of the public health grant that we get is 28 million. So you're looking at something similar to the cost that we put into public health. And I think we all stand here and how valuable the work that we do in public health with prevention. So you're talking about something of that size being wiped out from this. So, you know, I don't think you should be sitting there whispering and giggling. And Jewel, I'm not sure who you've been listening to, but maybe don't believe everything you're told, especially by officers and your colleagues, and maybe just do some of your own research. You seem to be living in cuckoo land, and I think by the reaction you've got in this chamber, no one's listening to you, no one believes you. You just need to get your facts right before you stand there and say things. And Max, just for your information, I don't actually read the Daily Mail. I don't really have time to read the Daily Mail. So what I do read is reports from companies that have the knowledge and experience that I can learn from. So, you know, we sat here, I don't know how far we were going back, but you said we're looking backwards, but it wasn't us that was mentioning backwards, it was all you lot mentioning backwards. I'm not sure how far back we were going to go, back to Tudor times. I don't know where we were going. But to be honest, no one mentioned the mistakes of the Blair and Brown years. No one mentioned that. You kindly brushed over that. So maybe just let's keep looking forward. That's where we're going. We're looking at looking after our residents going forward next year with a budget that's not going to be very good for us. And we are really concerned about where we're going to be once we get our settlement just before Christmas. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we'll now proceed to a vote on the motion. Oh, okay. So there'll clearly be a recorded vote now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Since 5 members have stood up, we'll take a recorded vote. So I'm going to read out your names and ask you please to indicate whether you're voting for the motion, against, or whether you wish to abstain. Mr. Allen.
For.
Mr. Ashman. For. Mr. Bannister.
For.
Mr. Barclay. For. Mr. Bedford. For. Mr. Bill. For. Mr. Bolter. For. Mr. Bray. For. Mr. Brecon. For. Mrs. Broadley. Mr. Champion. For. Mr. Chapman. For. Mr. Charlesworth. Mr. Coxon. For. Dr. Feltham. For. Mr. Frisbee. Mrs. Fryer.
For.
Mr. Galton. For. Mr. Gamble. Mr. Gattaraya. For. Mr. Gillard. For. Mr. Grimley. For. Mrs. Hack. Mr. Haji Nicolaou. For. Mr. Harrison. For. Mr. Harrison Rushton. For. Mr. Hills. Mr. Hunt. Mrs. Jordan. For. Mr. King. For. Mr. Lovegrove. For. Mr. Merry.
For.
Mr. Mear. Mr. Morgan. Mr. Mullaney. Thank you. Mrs. Newton. Mr. O'Shea. Mr. Orson. Sorry, Mrs. Page. Mr. Payne. Mr. Parton. Mr. Pendleton. Mr. Phillimore. Mr. Poland. Mrs. Posnett. Mrs. Bradford. Mr. Richardson. Mrs. Richardson. Mr. Rushton. Mrs. Seaton. Mr. Shepherd. Mr. Smith. Mrs. Taylor. Mr. Walker. Mrs. Wright. Thank you.
Just wait while the votes are counted, please. Thank you. There are 42 votes for the motion, 4 abstentions. The motion is therefore carried. And that concludes the meeting.